In this 23rd chapter of Erickson, we begin the whole subject of Christology, trying to see Jesus for who he was, what he was, the hope that we have in him. And in chapter 23, Erickson talks about the deity of Christ. The idea here is, do we call him God? How divine was he? The biblical teaching is that Jesus' self-consciousness should be seen as developmental. There's an outstanding old Princeton theologian named Gerhardus Voss, wrote a book called The Self-Understanding of Jesus. And the question is, was Jesus born knowing who he was? Or was he born as we are, but as he grew up, developed greater consciousness until he realized who he truly was? The general theme of the biblical record seems to indicate that Jesus' self-consciousness should be seen as developmental, that he gradually grew more and more to an awareness of what he really was and who he really was. If that were not true, it would be a little ridiculous if Jesus is laying there in the cradle and he sees the wise men coming and know they're coming, and I know that's chronologically a little questionable, but the point is, if Jesus saw those events and he's laying there pretending to be a baby and knowing everything, it seems a little bit silly. Rather, it's the idea that as he grew older, he became more and more aware of his mission and of who he was. Now, it's also true he never directly claimed to be God. But remember, to do so would not have proven that he was. The fact that he did not do so would not have proven that he was not. If he claimed to be God, that would have been a direct violation of his faith and of everything in the framework that he was a part of. Although indeed he was God. But the final proof, as with all things Christian, is the resurrection. So Jesus didn't come on the scene like so many other false teachers and claim that he was the Messiah. But what he did is he did the works of the Messiah. And of course the final work, the final proof, is, as Romans chapter 1 indicates, he was declared to be the Son of God by the resurrection from the dead. And there is no doubt that the New Testament writers believe that he was God. And note the use of the term Lord in the New Testament. There's a common use of the term Kurios, Lord, in the New Testament, but that is a translation of the Old Testament word for God, Yahweh. The mere fact that he's called Lord in the New Testament, that's not just a title of nobility, but that is a term that equates with the Old Testament word for God. And of course, then the resurrection remains the ultimate proof of divinity for Christians. Now, there's some historical departures from this. There was a heretical Jewish sect called the Ebionites who held on to a form of adoptionism. And they taught that Christ was the Spirit of God, but he withdrew from Jesus near the end of his life, and so left him to go through this torture all alone. And then, of course, good old Arianism, the Council of Nicaea, who taught that Jesus was divine, but he was not as divine as the Father. He was an intermediate being still. One element that's interesting is functional Christology. In today's theology, and many schools, many theological thinkers have difficulty understanding or predicating the divinity of Christ. They just can't figure it out. And they would emphasize that we understand Jesus not by just looking at creeds and affirming divinity, but rather the way that we should study Jesus is to look at his works and what he did rather than emphasizing what he was. That would be a form of what's called functional Christology. There's another saying called Christology from above, Christology from below. If you approach Christology from above, you are looking at Jesus as the Son of God and you're beginning with his divinity. If you utilize Christology from below, you begin with his humanity and emphasize his humanity and as being part of his mission for us. Neither one of those are necessarily false teachings. They're just different extremes. But functional Christology, if it only understands atonement in the terms of what Jesus did, then we are left with redemption in the category of what we do, and there really is no grace in that kind of Christology. So we really need a Jesus who's both fully God and fully human. Otherwise, we really don't have a religion in which we can experience full deliverance.